The council chamber was massive and stretched across the entire space station like a giant crystal dome. Admiral Kyle Harper stood in the center of the room with his hands behind his back and his uniform perfectly pressed. He had traveled for 6 months just to reach this place, and now he was standing in front of 47 different alien species who would decide humanity's fate. Behind him stood Ambassador Linda Pierce, who represented Earth's government, and she looked calm, but Kyle could see the worry in her eyes. The council speaker was a tall creature called a Velkesh, and it had 6 eyes that moved independently. It raised one of its long arms and the entire room went silent. The speaker's voice came through the translators in a deep tone that made everyone listen. It announced that humanity was accused of breaking the Concordat Treaty by building weapons that were too powerful and too dangerous. Kyle tried to explain that humans had only built defensive platforms around their own solar system and that they had followed every rule in the treaty. But the aliens did not want to listen. A reptilian counselor named Thexnor interrupted Kyle and said that humanity had only been in space for 200 years, and already they were trying to take over. The counselor said that humans were too aggressive and too ambitious to be trusted. Linda Pierce stepped forward and tried to defend humanity by saying that the treaty allowed them to protect their home system. But the speaker told her to be quiet. Then the verdict appeared in the air in front of them, written in 47 different languages. The speaker announced that humanity was banished from galactic space. All human colonies and stations beyond their home solar system had to be evacuated within 30 days. Any human found outside the Sol system after that would be destroyed. The chamber erupted with noise as different alien species reacted to the decision. Some aliens agreed with the punishment while others seemed uncertain. Linda Pierce could not believe what she was hearing. She said that humanity had 12 billion people living on 19 different colonies scattered across space. Moving all of them back to Earth in just 30 days was impossible. But the speaker said that 30 days was generous, and that the council could have chosen to exterminate humanity instead. The speaker told them that humanity would live, but they would be trapped in their own solar system like prisoners. Maybe in 10,000 years their descendants would learn to be humble. Kyle felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He said quietly that this was genocide by isolation. The speaker replied that it was justice. The council would set up a blockade around the Sol system, and if any human tried to cross it, they would face the combined military power of civilizations that had been traveling through space for thousands of years. The meeting ended with a sound wave that physically pushed the human delegation backward. As soon as the holographic connection was cut, Linda turned to Kyle with a pale face. He told her that they needed to get every ship and every person back home. They had 30 days to save 12 billion people. Linda asked what would happen after that. Kyle looked out at the stars through the transparent dome and saw thousands of civilizations that would now be forever out of reach. He told her that after 30 days humanity would survive because that is what humans do best. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. People were terrified and angry. Families who had lived on distant colonies for generations now had to abandon everything they had built. The government mobilized every transport ship and every cargo vessel that could carry passengers. Ships that normally took months to travel between systems were pushed to their limits with dangerous high-speed burns. Captains ignored safety protocols and packed their ships beyond capacity, because leaving anyone behind meant leaving them to die. Captain Daniel Cruz commanded a civilian transport called the Halifax, and he watched the evacuation of New Portland Colony with a heavy heart. 3 million people lived on this moon, and they had spent 2 generations turning barren rock into farmland. Now transport ships descended from orbit one after another, taking away everything the colonists had worked for. His first officer, Lieutenant Grace Kim, told him they were at 63% capacity, but Daniel said there was no time to prioritize who got on board. Every ship in human space was racing against time. On the view screen, Daniel could see an alien observation ship holding position at the edge of the system. The aliens were not helping with the evacuation, and they were not interfering either. They were just watching humanity scramble to save itself, like landlords watching tenants get evicted. Grace received a priority message from Captain Helen Woods, who ran a research station at Kepler 442. Woods appeared on screen looking exhausted and said she had made an important discovery. She said they had found evidence of an extragalactic threat with probe signatures that matched nothing in any database. This threat could affect every species in the galaxy, and the Council needed to know. But then the transmission cut to static. Grace tried to reconnect, but the alien ships had jammed all human deep space communications. They were cutting humanity off from the rest of the galaxy, and they were not even letting humans send warnings about dangers they had discovered. Daniel felt rage building inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Rage was a luxury they could not afford right now. 3 days later, the Halifax made its final burn toward home with its cargo holds packed full of colonists who had left everything behind. Daniel stood on the bridge watching humanity's outer territories disappear into the distance. Grace reported that all evacuation fleets were checking in, and they had managed to rescue 97% of the colonial population. The remaining 3% had chosen to stay either because they could not abandon their homes or because they thought they could hide from Council enforcers. Those people would learn the hard way that the Galactic Council did not make empty threats. As the familiar light of Earth's sun grew stronger ahead, Daniel allowed himself a moment of exhaustion. He said quietly that this was it and humanity was now confined to a single star system. Grace replied that humans had been confined before to single continents and single planets, and they had always found ways to thrive. Daniel said this was different. Grace pulled up a tactical display showing the boundary of the solar system and told him to look at what Admiral Harper had been building. Daniel's eyes went wide when he saw it. Dozens of defense stations ringed the edge of the solar system, and each one bristled with weapons. Manufacturing facilities connected them, and raw materials flowed in from asteroid mining operations. At strategic points stood massive structures that could only be called fortress stations. Daniel whispered that Harper was not building defenses but building a wall with teeth. Grace smiled and said it was better than that. Harper was building a message. The aliens wanted to lock humanity in, but they were going to learn that caging humans did not make them weaker. It made them dangerous. 2 years had passed since the banishment, and the Sol system had transformed into something the galaxy had never witnessed before. Commander Lisa Bennett walked through the manufacturing bay of Fortress Station Olympus, which was one of 12 massive installations ringing humanity's prison. The bay stretched for kilometers in every direction, and automated systems worked in perfect coordination assembling components. That would have made the Galactic Council inspectors furious. But the Council would never see inside these stations, because they maintained their blockade at a comfortable distance and seemed content, just making sure humanity stayed contained. Chief Engineer Paul Martinez met Lisa near the assembly line and wiped grease from his hands. He reported that production numbers were exceeding all projections, and they had completed retrofits on 6 heavy cruisers just this month. The new plasma lance batteries packed 3 times the punch of anything that was treaty compliant. Lisa nodded as she walked past rows of hull plating being welded by precision drones. She told Paul that the treaty did not matter anymore because the aliens had broken it when they imprisoned humanity. Now humans would build whatever they needed to survive. What humanity needed turned out to be a military force that could punch far above its weight class. With no resources beyond the Sol system and no trade partners and no allies, every single ship had to count for something. Admiral Kyle Harper had spent 2 years transforming Earth's Navy from a defensive force into something much more aggressive. The shipyards at Luna and Mars and the orbital platforms around Earth worked 3 shifts around the clock. Every vessel that emerged from these yards was a testament to human engineering, creativity when people were backed into a corner and fighting for survival. Lisa's communicator chimed and a voice told her to report to the command center immediately because incoming signals had been detected. She made her way through the corridors to the command center, where Admiral Harper stood before a massive holographic display. Captain Daniel Cruz had been promoted to fleet coordination, and he nodded grimly as Lisa entered the room. Harper ordered them to show her what they had found. The display shifted to show long-range scans beyond the blockade, and Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat. Those were Council warships, and there were a lot of them. Daniel confirmed that they had counted 347 ships gathering over the past month. Multiple species had sent fleets, including the Drexy hive clusters and Velkesh, dreadnoughts, and even some Corvin world burners. Lisa asked why the aliens were gathering such a massive fleet when humanity had stayed inside the boundary and followed all the rules of exile. Harper's expression was grim as he explained that humanity had been building defenses for 2 years, and the aliens had been watching. Intelligence reports suggested that certain council members were getting nervous about what might happen if humanity ever broke out of their cage. The council was debating whether to launch a preventive strike against Earth. The room fell into a heavy silence. Everyone understood what a preventive strike meant. It meant extinction. The council had enough firepower gathered there to sterilize every planet in the solar system if they decided humanity was too dangerous to exist. Lisa finally asked how much time they had left. Harper said it was unknown and could be months or could be weeks. The council moved slowly because all those different species had to debate everything endlessly, but once they made a decision that fleet would come. That was why Harper said they needed to accelerate Project Abyss. Lisa knew about Project Abyss because everyone in the military knew about it, even though the details were classified above most people's clearance levels. It was humanity's contingency plan and the reason for all the frantic construction over the past 2 years. Daniel said quietly that they were not ready because the fleet was only at 60% of target strength and the fortress network still had gaps in coverage. Harper replied that they would have to work faster. He ordered them to activate the secondary manufacturing protocols and said he wanted every shipyard running at maximum capacity. They would strip resources from non-essential infrastructure if they had to. Lisa interrupted and said that people needed that infrastructure for life support and agriculture and medical facilities. Harper cut her off, but not unkindly, and said that none of those things would matter if everyone was dead. The council was deciding whether humanity deserved to exist and humans needed to be ready to give the aliens their answer. Over the following months, the Sol system became a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The boundary of the solar system bristled with weapons platforms, and each one was connected to a network that could concentrate fire to obliterate capital ships. Behind this defensive perimeter, humanity's fleet grew exponentially with new ships rolling out of the yards every single day. But it was not just about building more ships. Human engineers had been freed from treaty restrictions and driven by the very real possibility of extinction. They began developing technologies that exploited every loophole and pushed every boundary of physics. They created magnetic acceleration cannons that treated enemy shields like tissue paper. They built missile swarms with quantum-entangled guidance systems that could not be jammed by any known technology. They developed armor plating using materials, science that the Council's older species had never bothered to research, because they thought they already knew everything. Captain Grace Kim now commanded the experimental cruiser, Defiant, and she ran combat drills that would have terrified Council strategists if they could see them. Her ship could accelerate at rates that should have turned the crew into paste, but they were protected by inertial dampening fields that were humanity's most closely guarded secret. She told her crew during one briefing that the Council thought humans were primitive children who had only been in space for 2 centuries. She said the aliens were about to learn that sometimes children grow up mean. All across human space, the preparation continued day and night. Asteroid mining operations worked without stopping to provide raw materials. Factory stations processed ore into hull plates and weapon components. Crews trained in simulation pods practicing tactics that broke every rule of conventional space warfare. Scientists worked on projects that would have been considered impossible just 5 years ago. On Earth itself, the population watched the military build up with mixed emotions. Some people were terrified that all this preparation would provoke the very attack they feared. Others felt pride that humanity was not going down without a fight. The government tried to keep morale up with speeches about human resilience and determination, but everyone knew the truth. If the Council decided to attack, there was no guarantee that humanity would survive. Admiral Harper spent his days coordinating the massive effort from Fortress Station Olympus. He barely slept, and when he did, it was in his office chair. He reviewed production reports and tactical assessments and intelligence briefings until the words blurred together. He knew that everything depended on timing. If the Council attacked before humanity was ready, it would be a slaughter. But if they could hold out just a little longer, they might have a chance. Lisa Bennett worked alongside Harper, coordinating the Fortress network expansion. She had given up her quarters on the station and now lived in the command center, surviving on coffee and determination. Paul Martinez and his engineering teams performed miracles every day, solving problems that should have taken years to fix. Daniel Cruz managed the impossible task of organizing humanity's scattered fleet into a coherent fighting force, and through it all, the Council fleet waited beyond the boundary, like a sword hanging over humanity's head. The aliens watched and debated and prepared while humans raced against time to turn their prison into a weapon. No one knew when the attack would come, but everyone knew it was coming. The only question was whether humanity would be ready when it did. The Council fleet entered the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, according to Earth Standard Time. 392 warships crossed the boundary, representing the combined might of civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They did not come with warnings or ultimatums. They came with an extermination order. Admiral Kyle Harper watched them cross into human space from his command post on Fortress Station Olympus. Around him, his staff maintained professional calm, though he could see the fear in their eyes. This was it. Humanity's final test. Commander Lisa Bennett announced that all stations were reporting ready, and fleet formations were in position. Ground-based planetary defenses were active and standing by. Harper studied the enemy formation carefully. The Council had arranged their ships in a traditional wedge, which was a formation that had proven effective in countless battles across 10,000 years of galactic history. It was designed to concentrate overwhelming firepower on a single point and crush any defense through sheer mass and numbers. It was also extremely predictable. Harper gave the order to Captain Daniel Cruz to initiate Protocol Abyss. Daniel's fingers moved across his console, and all across the Sol system, humanity's response began. The first surprise came when the asteroid belt was not where the Council's navigators expected it to be. Humanity had spent 2 years carefully moving key asteroids and positioning them not for mining operations, but for ambush. As the Council fleet advanced, hundreds of asteroids suddenly activated their drives and began accelerating into attack vectors. These were not missiles in the traditional sense. They were kinetic kill vehicles. Each one was a mountain of iron and stone moving at relativistic speeds. The Council's point defense systems opened fire, immediately destroying dozens of incoming asteroids. But there were hundreds more, and they were just the opening move in humanity's strategy. Harper gave the command to launch the swarm. From concealed positions throughout the outer system, missile pods began firing. Not dozens of missiles, not hundreds. Thousands upon thousands of smart missiles launched simultaneously. Each missile was smaller than a fighter craft, but packed with enough antimatter to crack a cruiser's hull wide open. The Council fleet's formation began to waver as commanders realized they were facing a threat density unlike anything in their tactical databases. Their doctrine called for disciplined firing patterns and target prioritization and defensive coordination between ships. Humanity's doctrine called for overwhelming violence of action. Harper ordered the fleet to advance and gave all ships weapons-free authorization. From behind the fortress network, humanity's battle fleet emerged into open space. 60 heavy cruisers led the charge, followed by 200 destroyers and 400 fast attack craft. They did not match the enemy in tonnage or total numbers, but they matched them in fury and determination. Captain Grace Kim's cruiser, Defiant, led the charge, with her ship accelerating past what Council sensors said was physically possible. Her plasma lances reached out across the void of space, punching through a Velkesh dreadnought's shields and coring the massive ship like an apple. Her weapons officer reported target destroyed with grim satisfaction and immediately began acquiring the next target. All around, Grace's ship, humanity's fleet, engaged in combat that broke every established rule of space warfare that the Council had developed over millennia. Human ships did not maintain rigid formation. They scattered in all directions, with each vessel acting as an independent hunter, seeking vulnerable prey. They used the sun's gravity well for slingshot maneuvers that put them behind enemy lines. They coordinated attacks through quantum-encrypted channels that could not be intercepted or jammed. The Council fleet had superior firepower and numbers, but humanity had rage and desperation. Commander Lisa Bennett coordinated the fortress network from Olympus with her display, showing the battle unfolding across millions of kilometers. She ordered Fortress Stations 7 and 9 to concentrate fire on a Corvin command ship. She redirected Station 3's plasma batteries to support the Defiance attack group. The battle raged on for 18 brutal hours. Space around the Sol system became a graveyard filled with wreckage from both sides. Explosions lit up the void as ships died and their reactors detonated. Debris fields expanded outward from destroyed vessels, creating hazards for the surviving ships still fighting. The Council had expected an easy victory against a young species with limited experience. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow any predictable pattern. Human ships would retreat when pressed, then suddenly reverse course and attack from unexpected angles. They used weapons combinations that should not have worked according to established physics. They took risks that seemed suicidal but somehow paid off. A group of human destroyers led by Commander Jake Peterson executed a maneuver that would be studied for years afterward. They dove straight into the heart of the Council formation, ignoring the crossfire, and released their entire missile payload at point-blank range. 3 enemy capital ships were destroyed before the destroyers broke away. 2 of the human ships did not survive, but their sacrifice opened a gap in the enemy line. Grace Kim exploited that gap immediately. She drove the Defiant through the opening with a dozen other cruisers following her lead. They emerged behind the Council's main battle line and began systematically destroying support vessels. Supply ships and repair craft and command carriers exploded under concentrated human fire. The Council fleet tried to reform, but their commanders were used to fighting according to doctrine and established procedures. They sent requests for orders up the chain of command and waited for coordinated responses. By the time orders came back, the tactical situation had already changed. Human ships did not wait for orders. Captains made split-second decisions and acted on them immediately. Admiral Harper watched the battle unfold from Olympus and allowed himself a moment of hope. The plan was working. Humanity was not trying to defeat the entire Council fleet in straight combat. That would have been impossible. Instead, they were inflicting maximum casualties and demonstrating that any victory would come at an unacceptable cost. As the 18th hour of combat arrived, the Council fleet began to break. Ship after ship turned away from the battle and started burning for the system boundary. Their commanders had finally calculated the cost of continuing and realized that destroying humanity would require them to lose most of their fleet. That was a price the Council members would not pay. Of the 392 ships that had entered the Sol system, 71 limped back across the boundary in retreat. The rest became wreckage floating in the void as silent monuments to the cost of underestimating humanity. But victory had not come cheap for the humans either. 23 cruisers had been destroyed in the fighting. 94 destroyers were lost. Over 200 attack craft would never return to their bases. Fortress Station 6 had been reduced to scrap metal by concentrated enemy fire. More than 40,000 human personnel had died defending their home. Admiral Harper stood on the bridge of Olympus, looking at the tactical display showing scattered debris and fleeing enemy ships. Around him, his staff was silent as they processed what they had accomplished. Against the combined might of the Galactic Council, humanity had held the line and forced the enemy to retreat. Daniel Cruz quietly reported that they were receiving a transmission from the Council fleet. The aliens were requesting terms of surrender. Harper allowed himself a cold smile. He told Daniel to send a simple message back to the Council. Humanity's terms were straightforward. Leave them alone or come back and humans would finish what the aliens had started. The message was sent and the Council fleet continued its retreat without responding. Harper knew this was not the end. The Council would debate and argue, and eventually they would have to decide what to do about the species they had tried to cage. But for now, humanity had won the most important victory. They had proven they could not be easily destroyed. Lisa Bennett approached Harper and quietly asked what would happen next. Harper looked at the debris field that now surrounded their solar system. He said that the galaxy had just learned an important lesson. You do not threaten humanity with extinction and expect them to go quietly. The Council had tried to bury the human race. But they had forgotten that sometimes when you bury something, you are actually planting seeds, and those seeds had just grown into something dangerous. 3 years after the battle, things had changed in ways nobody expected. The Galactic Council had retreated and humanity had proven they could defend themselves, but isolation was still the reality. The blockade remained in place, though the Council kept their ships much further away now. They watched from a distance like nervous guards who had learned that the prisoner could bite. But something else was happening in the galaxy. Captain Helen Woods had tried to warn everyone about it before the communications were cut. Now the proof was undeniable. An extragalactic threat had entered the galaxy from the void between spiral arms. The Council called them the Devourers, and the name fit perfectly. Admiral Kyle Harper studied the intelligence reports coming from long-range sensors. 17 star systems had already been consumed. The Devourers moved from system to system, stripping every planet and moon and asteroid of all resources. They left nothing behind but empty space. Their fleet was massive and unlike anything the galaxy had encountered before. The Council had sent their combined fleets to intercept the Devourers, and the results had been catastrophic. 3 major battles had ended in Council defeats. Thousands of ships destroyed, millions of alien personnel lost. The Devourers used tactics that overwhelmed traditional defensive formations. They attacked in swarms that broke apart and reformed. They adapted to enemy weapons in real time. They showed no interest in communication or negotiation. Ambassador Linda Pierce received a transmission from the Council after the 3rd defeat. It was the first official communication in 3 years. The Council speaker appeared on her screen looking considerably less confident than during the banishment hearing. The speaker said that the Council recognized they had made errors in judgment regarding humanity. The galaxy faced an existential threat and all species needed to work together. Linda listened to the speech without expression. When the speaker finished, she asked what exactly the Council wanted from humanity. The speaker said they needed tactical consultation and advanced weapons designs and fleet coordination expertise. In exchange, the blockade would be lifted, though restrictions on human colonial expansion would remain in place. Linda told the speaker she would present the offer to Earth's government and Admiral Harper. The transmission ended and Linda sat back in her chair. She called Harper immediately and told him about the Council's request. Harper laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. He said the Council had spent 3 years keeping humanity locked up and now they wanted help because their old tactics were not working. Linda agreed it was ironic, but pointed out that the Devourers would not stop at Council space. Eventually, they would reach the Sol system and humanity would face them alone. Harper was silent for a moment, then said she was right. He asked what conditions she thought they should demand. Linda said the Council needed to learn that humanity was not some minor species to be ordered around. Any agreement had to treat humans as equals. The negotiations took 2 months. The Council wanted humanity's help, but many members still did not trust humans. Some argued that letting humanity out of containment was dangerous. Others, particularly the Drexy, whose colonies were directly in the Devourer's path, said that pride was a luxury they could not afford. Survival had to come first. The final agreement was limited but significant. Humanity would provide tactical advisors to Council fleets. Human ship designs and weapons technology would be shared. Joint training exercises would be conducted. In exchange, the blockade would be lifted immediately. Humans could travel freely through Council space, though establishing new permanent colonies required Council approval. It was not full freedom, but it was progress. Captain Grace Kim was promoted to Admiral and given command of humanity's first joint task force with Council species. She stood on the bridge of her new flagship, looking at the alien vessels that now flew in formation with human ships. The irony was not lost on her. 5 years ago, these same species had tried to exterminate humanity. Now they were following human tactical doctrine. She opened a channel to all vessels in the task force. Her voice was calm and professional. She told them that the Devourers did not follow Council rules of engagement. They did not care about honor or tradition or the elegant formations that had worked for thousands of years. The Devourers were a grinding machine and you needed to think like one to beat them. She ordered all ships to forget their old formations and forget their established doctrine. Today they would learn to fight like humans. The battle happened near a binary star system that the Council had designated as a defensive line. The Devourers arrived in force with hundreds of massive harvest ships protected by thousands of combat drones. The Council fleet had positioned itself according to traditional defensive doctrine, with capital ships in the center and support vessels behind. Grace immediately ordered the formation to break apart. Council captains hesitated, confused by the command. She repeated the order with more force. She told them that maintaining formation made them predictable, and the Devourers would exploit that. The fleet needed to scatter and attack from multiple vectors simultaneously. Slowly, the Council ships began to spread out. Human vessels led by example, accelerating into attack patterns that seemed chaotic, but were carefully coordinated. Grace had spent months training with these Council captains. Now she had to trust that they had learned the lessons. The Devourers moved to engage and their combat drones swarmed forward in a massive wave. The Council's first instinct was to concentrate defensive fire. Grace countermanded that order. She told specific ship groups to ignore the drones and target the harvest ships directly. Other groups were assigned to hit the drones from the flanks. The battle quickly became chaotic, exactly as Grace intended. Devourer drones were deadly, but they were programmed for specific tactical responses. When the Council fleet broke into small groups attacking from unexpected angles, the drones struggled to adapt. Human ships equipped with experimental weapons tore through drone formations, creating gaps that Council vessels exploited. Commander Lisa Bennett coordinated fire support from a human carrier that hung back from the main combat zone. She directed missile strikes and drone launches with perfect timing. When a Council cruiser got surrounded by enemies, she sent a wave of attack craft to clear the threat. The Council captain sent a message thanking her, and she replied that they were all on the same side now. The battle raged for 6 hours. It was brutal and costly, but when it ended, the Devourers had been forced to retreat. 3 of their harvest ships were destroyed, and hundreds of combat drones had been eliminated. The Council fleet had taken heavy casualties, with 15 capital ships lost and dozens more damaged. But they had won their first real victory against the Devourers. Grace stood on her bridge as the enemy withdrew. Around her, the mixed crew of humans and aliens worked together, processing damage reports and casualty lists. A Velkesh officer approached and said that the Admiral's tactics had saved them. Grace replied that it was not about tactics but about being willing to adapt and change. Back in the Sol system, Admiral Harper received the battle reports. Daniel Cruz stood beside him reviewing the data. The joint fleet had performed better than expected. Council species were learning to fight differently, and the combination of their resources with human innovation was proving effective. But Harper knew this was just the beginning. The Devourers were still out there consuming system after system. More battles would come, and not all of them would end in victory. He looked at the display showing human ships now operating throughout Council space. They were no longer trapped in their own system. The cage was open. Lisa Bennett entered the command center with Paul Martinez. She said that construction crews were already working on the next generation of ships. The Council had agreed to share their manufacturing facilities and resources. Human engineers would have access to materials and technologies that had been denied to them before. Harper nodded slowly. He said that 3 years ago the Council had tried to bury humanity by locking them away. They thought isolation would make humans weak and teach them humility. Instead, it had made humanity harder and sharper and more dangerous than ever. Now the Council needed that danger, and they were learning to work with it instead of against it. Paul said that was ironic. Harper replied that it was more than ironic. It was a lesson that would reshape the galaxy. You cannot cage a species like humanity and expect them to stay weak. Pressure does not break humans. It forges them into something stronger. The Council had created the very weapon they now needed to survive. Grace Kim's task force returned to friendly space and docked at a Council station for repairs and resupply. She walked through the station and saw humans and aliens working side by side. Crews mixed together. Officers from different species shared tactical ideas over meals. It was not perfect and tension still existed, but it was cooperation born from necessity. She met with Linda Pierce, who had come to debrief the mission. Linda said that the Council was already requesting more joint task forces. They wanted human advisors on every major fleet. Grace asked if the Council finally understood that humanity deserved respect. Linda smiled and said that respect was earned through action, and humanity had earned plenty. The Devourers had done what no amount of diplomacy could. 5 years had passed since humanity broke free from their cage, and the galaxy looked very different now. The war against the Devourers continued, but the tide had slowly begun to turn. Council fleets fought alongside human vessels, and together they were learning how to win. But the cost was staggering. Entire civilizations had been evacuated. Dozens of systems had fallen. The Devourers showed no signs of stopping. Admiral Grace Kim commanded the largest joint task force ever assembled, with over 200 ships from 15 different species. Her flagship was a human-designed carrier built with Council resources. The ship represented everything the Alliance had become. Human innovation combined with alien manufacturing capability, aggressive tactics mixed with vast resources. The result was a fighting force that could actually stand against the Devourers. She stood on the bridge preparing for what intelligence called the critical battle. The Devourers were converging on a cluster of heavily populated systems in Council core space. If those systems fell, millions of civilians would die, and the Council's industrial capacity would be crippled. Everything depended on holding this defensive line. Commander Lisa Bennett was now second in command of the task force, and she coordinated fleet movements from her station. She had spent 5 years fighting this war, and it showed in her eyes. Paul Martinez served as chief engineer, and he had revolutionized how the mixed fleet maintained their ships. Human repair techniques combined with alien technology kept vessels in fighting condition that should have been scrapped. The Devourers arrived in the largest force anyone had seen. Intelligence estimated over 1,000 combat vessels and 15 massive harvest ships. They moved through space like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Grace watched them approach and felt the weight of command. This battle would determine whether the Alliance could actually win the war or just delay the inevitable. She opened channels to all ships in the task force. Her voice was steady and calm. She told them that they had trained for this moment. Every species in the fleet brought unique strengths, and together they were stronger than the sum of their parts. She reminded them that the Devourers were adaptable and dangerous, but they were not invincible. Humanity had proven that. Now the galaxy would prove it together. The battle began with the Devourers launching their drone swarms. Thousands of autonomous combat units accelerated toward the defensive line. Grace gave the order to implement Dispersal Pattern Omega. The fleet broke into dozens of small groups, each operating independently. Council captains no longer hesitated at such orders. They had learned that human tactics worked. The Velkesh heavy cruisers formed the anvil holding position and absorbing the main drone assault. Human destroyers acted as the hammer, sweeping in from the flanks and tearing into drone formations. Drexy swarm fighters used their superior numbers to overwhelm isolated enemy units. Corvin battleships with their massive energy weapons focused fire on the harvest ships. Grace directed the battle like conducting an orchestra. She moved task groups around the battlefield, repositioning assets to exploit weaknesses. When a Devourer harvest ship's shields dropped, she sent every available bomber to finish it. When drone swarms threatened to overwhelm a position, she redirected fire support to break up the attack. Admiral Kyle Harper watched the battle unfold from Fortress Station Olympus, back in the Sol system. Earth's government had decided that Harper was too valuable to risk in frontline combat. He coordinated the broader strategic picture, now directing resources and reinforcements across multiple battle zones. But his mind was with Grace and the fleet fighting at the core worlds. Daniel Cruz stood beside Harper, analyzing tactical data in real time. He pointed out that the Devourers were adapting faster than previous engagements. They were learning from the Alliance's tactics and adjusting their responses. Harper nodded grimly. The enemy was evolving, and that made them more dangerous. Back at the battle, Grace saw the same thing. Devourer units that should have fallen for feint attacks were no longer taking the bait. Their formation patterns were changing, becoming less predictable. She realized with a chill that the Devourers had been learning from every encounter. They were using the Alliance's own tactics against them. She made a split-second decision. She ordered the fleet to abandon all established tactical patterns. Every ship was to act on individual initiative, targeting whatever seemed most vulnerable. It was organized chaos, and it went against every principle of fleet coordination. But predictability was death against an enemy that learned this fast. The council captains trusted her enough to follow the order. The battle dissolved into hundreds of individual ship actions. A Velkesh cruiser captain saw an opportunity and took it, destroying a Devourer command node. A human destroyer sacrificed itself to ram a harvest ship's engine section. Drexy fighters swarmed a damaged enemy vessel and tore it apart. The Devourers struggled to adapt to pure chaos. Their learning algorithms needed patterns to analyze. When every ship acted independently and unpredictably, the Devourers lost their coordination advantage. The tide of battle slowly shifted. Lisa Bennett coordinated the carrier groups, launching wave after wave of fighters and bombers. She worked alongside a Corvin tactical officer and a Drexy squadron leader. They argued and debated and shouted at each other, but somehow made it work. The carrier group's combined strike destroyed 3 harvest ships in rapid succession. After 9 hours of combat, the Devourers began to withdraw. They had lost 6 harvest ships and hundreds of combat units. The Alliance had paid a terrible price, with 43 capital ships destroyed and countless smaller vessels lost. But they had held the line. The core worlds were safe. Grace stood exhausted on her bridge, surrounded by crew members from 4 different species. Everyone was too tired to celebrate. They had won, but the war was far from over. A Velkesh officer approached and said that the council speaker wanted to address the fleet. Grace nodded, and the speaker's image appeared on every ship's main display. The speaker looked different than 5 years ago. less arrogant, more weary. It said that the Alliance had achieved a great victory today. Every species in the fleet had proven their courage and skill. But the speaker wanted to acknowledge something specific. It said that humanity had been treated unjustly 5 years ago. The Council had feared human ambition and tried to contain it through isolation. The speaker continued saying that fear had been misguided. Humanity's strength did not come from ambition but from resilience. When faced with extinction, humans adapted and innovated and survived. The Council had tried to bury humanity, and instead had forged them into the weapon the galaxy needed. The speaker formally apologized for the banishment and announced that all remaining restrictions on human activity were lifted. Humanity would have full membership in the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Grace listened to the speech without expression. When it ended, she turned to Lisa and quietly said that an apology did not bring back the 40,000 who died defending Earth 5 years ago. Lisa agreed but pointed out that their sacrifice had not been in vain. Humanity had not just survived. They had reshaped the entire galaxy. Back on Earth, Admiral Harper received news of the victory and the Council's announcement. Ambassador Linda Pierce was with him, and she said this was everything they had fought for. Harper replied that it was not about Council membership or official recognition. It was about proving that humanity could not be broken. The cage had been opened, but not because the Council was generous. It opened because humanity had bent the bars. Over the following months, the Alliance continued pushing back the Devourers. Human tactics spread throughout Council fleets. Joint training programs expanded. New technologies emerged from combined research efforts. The war was far from over, but for the first time, victory seemed possible. Grace Kim was promoted again and given overall command of Alliance military operations. She was the first human to hold such a position. Her appointment was not charity or symbolism. It was recognition that she had earned the role through competence and proven leadership. Council species accepted her authority because she had led them to victory. Lisa Bennett returned to the Sol system to oversee the expansion of Earth's military infrastructure. The fortress network that had defended humanity 5 years ago was now being extended outward. Not as a cage, but as a foundation for human expansion. New colonies were being established with Council blessing. Human merchants traded freely across the galaxy. Paul Martinez led teams of engineers working on next-generation warships. They combined the best elements of human and alien technology. The ships they designed were faster and tougher and more adaptable than anything that had come before. Each vessel represented the Alliance working at its best. Daniel Cruz coordinated logistics for the entire war effort. He made sure fleets had supplies and ammunition and replacement parts. It was unglamorous work, but absolutely critical. Without his efforts, the Alliance would have collapsed under its own weight. Admiral Harper remained at Fortress Station Olympus, coordinating the broader strategic picture. He had become one of the most influential figures in the galaxy, though he never sought recognition. Council members consulted him on military matters. Alliance strategy reflected his thinking.